Man, F-16 pilots are the worst. You know, when they come to parties and all they do is talk about them. So, hey, everybody.
I got a funny joke about F-16 pilots to start this one off. What's the difference between an F-16 pilot and the F-16 engine? The engine stops whining when you shut it down. No? Nothing?
Yeah, you froze. So you'll see in the podcast where I started to talk over Aaron because he froze and I just jumped in there. And this time I tried to be professional and it just didn't work out.
Yeah, and you didn't even get to hear the punchline, but that's going to be the funny part of this one. So on the podcast this week with Trenton and myself, and you'll understand why we call him Trenton here in a second, we have Col Nick Nichols. His call sign is actually Nick. He tells a great story about how he got it later in the podcast that almost destroyed both Trent and I. So foldsofhonor.org is a fantastic organization that helps out. Their sole purpose is to help fund the colleges through scholarships of first responders, military members that have unfortunately paid the ultimate price in combat and or training exercise. So foldsofhonor.org, go check them out. There's a donate button. We talk about it in the podcast, but we wanted to open this one up by making sure that you know what this awesome organization is. So go over to foldsofhonor.org. You can either hit the squadron button or the donate button. You can read all about them in the about section. It pops right up when you check it out. Col Nick Nichols was gracious enough to come on, lay out his amazing 30-year career as an F-16 pilot, and then what led him to Folds of Honor. This one is awesome. You know, Trent, I'll turn it over to you for your feelings on this one, but I had an amazing time, and it was definitely humbling talking to Col Nichols.
Absolutely. Like it, you know, you meet some of these people, super relatable guy. And I've said it before and I'll say it again. If I did this podcast simply for my own edification and betterment, it would be worth it to talk to people like the Col Nick Nichols. So his story is amazing. The cause is amazing. And if you don't want to donate just money, they also sell some sweet merchandise. I'm about to go on there right now and get me a t-shirt. Or a long sleeve shirt, whatever. They look pretty sweet. So lots of ways to do it. What they're doing is super righteous, and I can't say enough good things about not only, you know, Col Nick, but also the organization Folds of Honor.
Yeah, absolutely. Hope you enjoy this one, Trent. And I got a lot out of it. So without further ado, Folds of Honor and Col Nick Nichols. Welcome back, everybody, to the Ones Ready Team Room. We got a great one for you today. It's Trent and myself, and we brought in Col Nick Nichols from Folds of Honor. He is a 30-year Air Force veteran, retired colonel, F-16 driver by trade and by nature. He's got a great sign about a call sign that a great story about a call sign that I actually agree with for the first time in the history of the podcast. So this is a big one, sir. Thank you for coming on. Welcome. How are you today?
Right on. I'm good. Aaron, Trent, thank you so much for having me on, and thank you guys for both of your service.
Yeah, absolutely. Trent has done way more than I have. I've just basically, ridden on his coattails this entire time. It's exactly like the podcast, to be honest with you. You know, Peaches and Trent are out here doing the Lord's work, and I'm just sort of along for the ride. So, Colonel, why don't you tell us a little bit about you and your history? Take us all the way back. Did you always want to be a fighter pilot coming into the Air Force, or was that something that you just kind of like came into?
No, definitely not something I came into. So I'm third generation Air Force, so I'm a blue blood. My dad was a fighter pilot, so Vietnam War era F4s, F100s, and super cool Purple Heart, Silver Star. So come from a very strong family name, strong tradition in that. So ever since I can remember, as a little kid, all I ever wanted to do was be a fighter pilot. So my dad actually ended up being one of the first generation guys in the F-16. So that obviously imprints on you at a young age. You know, dad was my hero and all that stuff. And so very fortunate to go on and and have the privilege of serving in that capacity. You know, I definitely wasn't smart enough to go to the Air Force Academy, so I went the ROTC route and.
I like you even more, sir. You have a normal call sign. You didn't go to the academy. I got to be honest with you. You're in the early running for my favorite guest of all time. So I just want to put that out there.
I love it. Yeah. So I graduated from the Valdosta State University. I have to put the imperative in front of it because it makes it sound way cooler. But a little school in South Georgia, ROTC, and then off to the races.
That's awesome. So you got through pilot training. Was there anything like crazy about pilot training? I assume that you just flew right through with the pedigree that you had. Like you knew what you were getting into. You were prepared probably pretty well.
Really, comparatively. Already flying right through pilot traiing. Is that
I got more of them, baby. I got more of them. I'll tell you what, you're going to want to eject by the end of this one, big guy.
Now, to be to be completely transparent with you, so here I am. So I graduated from Valdosta State University, and I was a decent student and stuff. Like I made it through, and so I graduated. I remember showing up to pilot training, and I just got married, right? So show up to pilot training that first night. You're kind of meeting everybody, and it's kind of one of those things. Like you guys remember when you get into the first training, everybody's kind of like, like who's that dude, kind of sizing each other up and all this other stuff. And then
it would be nice if we could just meet each other, but you don't. It's constantly butt sniffing. It's like, it's testing fences right away with everybody. Sure.
Yeah. Who's the alpha in the room? And it's funny because I started talking to these guys and like, hey, like common questions like, where'd you graduate from college and all this other stuff. And then a couple of these guys were like, well, I just finished up my master's at MIT and, I just finished my postgraduate at Harvard and all that other stuff. So I'm not winning the sniffing contest in my mind at this point, right? And
sure.
I remember going back that night. I didn't tell my wife this, but I'm like, I don't think that they were supposed to let me in here. I don't know how I got here, but I'm here. But what was funny and something that instilled on me very early in life, somebody's always going to be smarter than you, stronger than you, better looking, taller or whatever. But the one thing I could control is making sure that nobody ever outworked me. And I said, I'm a little intimidated. I can be transparent about that. But I'm going to fight for what I want. So that was probably the biggest thing at pilot training. And what was cool, so I went to, it's called Euro-NATO Joint Jet Pilot Training in Wichita Falls, Texas. And a lot of the Europeans went there. And that was really, really super cool, getting to meet all those guys and, fly with guys from, England and, Denmark and all that stuff. It was very cool.
I want to do a British accent so bad right now. Like, my great granddad flew in the Great War.
Oh my God. Why did you just turn into like Oliver Twist? Are you asking for more gruel? That's not even a good one. Man.
No, something you said earlier, sir, really caught my attention, and I just think I just want to make note of it. It's weird that our dads, are our heroes no matter what they are, whether it's good or bad. They're always something that we can look up to and aspire to, or puts a chip on your shoulder that sets you up for success like that.
No, 100%. Yeah, I mean, and and I was fortunate to have an awesome dad and stuff, and that was able to imprint on me early in life and instill enough value and work ethic. Although it took me at least through my first year of college to find that work ethic and stuff. Yeah, y'all can relate. I get it.
Standard.
And stuff, but yeah, it served me well.
Yeah. So how hard was it to get the F-16? Like I've heard stories from other pilots and all these other things. You didn't want to be a bus driver. Much love to my C-130, C-17 folks out there. But, and did you have the opportunity to go elsewhere, but you were just like, hey, I have to be at the top of my class to get this platform because my dad also had experience with that?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, Euro-NATO was, the pilot training there it was geared towards, everybody going to fighters. Okay. It was unlike all the other undergraduate pilot training bases in the Air Force. And so, if you made it through, your odds were very, very good. Right. But it was a little bit longer of a program, more check rides and stuff like that. So, for a lot of guys, it was a little bit of a higher threat to get washed out of the training and stuff. I mean, we had guys dropping like flies the first 3 months of training. It was crazy. You just get to know somebody, and then next day you're like, where'd Bob go? Well, Bob's no longer here.
Did you feel that extra pressure, even like knowing that you had that extra pressure, like that extra weight of your dad? Like he was a plank owner. I guarantee your instructors knew who your dad was. I guarantee that cat didn't stay in that bag very long. Did you feel extra pressure, especially with the higher attrition rate of living up to that strong Nichols name, like going forward and being an F-16 guy in that realm?
I did. And it was, but it was kind of it was added pressure, but it was a good pressure, right? It was, and again, I go back to my earlier comment, don't ever let anybody outwork you. And that was part of the motivation there. It's like, what, you got a family name to carry on. So, do your family, the service of that. And plus at the same, like I said, I'm married, I was like, I got a responsibility here now, take care of my wife and, future family and all that stuff, and and do what I want to do and stuff. And it's just kind of one of those things. Like pilot training, really for the first 3 months, started off for me a little bit rough, and then you transition from the T-37 to a T-38, which is more of a fighter type aircraft. And man, the light bulb just clicked on for me then. I was just like it. And so pilot training transitioned from being work to being fun. And once you start having fun at something, especially something, that's your job and you love, man, life just goes way easier after that.
So yeah, absolutely. I think we definitely relate to that sentiment, that point in time. But I have to ask, as you gained more familiarity with all the platforms out there, were you ever tempted to not go with the single engine lawn dart and go with something a little safer?
Well, Trenton, let me tell you something.
Now we know.
You deserve that one. I'm happy for it.
That was a softball right there. No, there was never any consideration for that whatsoever.
Fantastic. So when you know. Spoiler alert, you get through the NATO program, even with the extra check rides, you get your aircraft of choice. You're in that F-16. Where did you go as your first assignment, and kind of how did you feel becoming a real boy? Because people ask us this question too, like being in the pipeline, being in pilot training, it's the same thing. When you're getting close to graduating, you're really at the top of the food chain. Like even your instructors, they're giving you kudos, you're riding high, and then you show up to that first unit. And typically what we tell our young pups is like, hey, congratulations, you've done something thousands of other people have done, and go take the trash out because you're the team member on the team. So yeah. Did you have that experience?
Oh God, yes. Yeah. And so when you're like, because you're kind of feeling it after pilot training, right? You're like, all right, man, I'm good. You got wings on my chest, walking around in your flight suit, hanging out the O Club. You're the graduated guy. And
I'm a dang fighter pilot.
Yeah. And well, then then there's all this obviously other training that you get to, before you get to F-16 training. But, my first operational base was in Misawa Air Base, Japan, with the 13th Fighter Squadron. And I showed up there in 1993, I think it is. I think that's right. And so you walk in day one, and you all of a sudden realize, you know what, I'm back to where I started. You're just like, oh, this is first day of pilot training again, and I'm not really that important, and nobody here really thinks that I'm really worth anything right now. And it was just exactly that. So, when you walk in as a brand new lieutenant, you become the snacko, which you guys obviously know is the snack officer. So your job is to make sure that all the appropriate beverages are not only in there, but stocked fully and stuff. And I remember the most traumatizing experience that I had. I can't remember the general's name, who was our wing commander, but his thing was he loved Diet Dr. Pepper. Guess what wasn't in the refrigerator when he came to fly?
Much to his chagrin and much to your understandable demise.
Yep. There was no Diet Dr. Pepper. Guess who got yanked off the flying schedule to go to the commissary and get Diet Dr. Pepper? This guy.
See, now that's a valuable lesson. You know what I mean? We understand that, you probably didn't realize it at the time, sir, but your actions have consequences, and we have a high standard to uphold. So unless you have some cold Diet Dr. Pepper in there for the man when he wants one, you're going to have to pay a penalty. And I hope that you learned your lesson.
I did. And so after that, my smart ass lieutenant reaction was I literally filled up 2/3 of the refrigerator with Diet Dr. Pepper.
How'd that go for you?
Not well, it was like, hey, Nick, I think that's a little overboard and maybe offensive to the general and stuff. I just want to make sure you didn't run out.
You always, as a young guy, you always have these ideas. You're like, I'm going to get him. He's going to think this is funny. Like he's going to be bad. It never works out well. And no. I'll tell you what, and it doesn't matter how many times, like, you are a generation, just a half a generation above, Trent and myself. And then we always tell the generation behind us, like, hey, that's never going to work out. Guess what? You're never going to figure out. You're never going to figure out not to make that smart ass joke. It's just the way of the young guy.
Yes, we're destined to repeat the sins of those who went before us, for sure.
We are. So as you get your feet underneath you, as you start training, so, we're talking mid-90s, Misawa, Japan. It's not like things weren't going on, right? But you can start to feel things sort of ramp up. So you had to be, captain, senior captain, kind of major in that 97, 98. You've gotten your upgrades. When did you take your first real step into a leadership position? And was it at Misawa? Did you grow up, cut your teeth, get some flight time under you, and then step into a leadership position? Or how did that career, progression work for you?
Yeah. So, when I was at Misawa, no, not, I was too young to step into a flight commander position and stuff like that. And that was during the time frame that they weren't cycling a lot of new guys in. So you kind of stayed the new guy for like way too long. I think I was a snaggle for a year and a half, and it should have been.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But I was able to go, get all the way through becoming a, 2-ship flight lead, 4-ship flight lead, and a mission commander. So leadership roles, took the form of leading in the air. And
Sure.
So that was super cool that I got to, kind of, fill all those squares within my first 3 years of being in the jet, operationally and stuff was very, very cool and very rewarding.
What kind of real world stuff was going on back then? I'm assuming the Koreas and some of the other stuff that you guys were flying around and taking care of and making sure everybody stayed in their places.
Yeah. I mean, so we would backfill on the rock on occasion, when one of the squadrons was out of the country and stuff. But I mean, that was, so you remember back, you go all the way back to 1991, the first Gulf War. So, we're in the fight then in with Iraq, right? We've got Operation Southern Watch and Operation
Southern and Northern Watch. Yeah.
Yeah. So my first combat deployment was in 1996, where we deployed to Saudi Arabia, and we were flying missions in Southern Iraq, defending the no-fly zone in the south.
Was that pretty boring, or did you have any clinching type moments over there?
I believe they call those emotional events, Trent. Did you have any emotional events, sir?
What was it's not funny, but it was interesting. Like, you have no idea in your mind, right? Before you go on your first combat tour, you're painting all these pictures in your head, like, watching the movies and all this stuff. And, super fired up, young fighter pilot, just kind of full of piss and vinegar, ready to go and stuff. And then we're en route. And I don't know if you guys remember this or not, but that's, we got there about a week after the Khobar Tower bombings, where I think we lost 19 Americans
we did
that day. And things got really, kind of got very, very real, because I remember getting on the base and naturally you kind of, you want to pay your respects, and you walk over to the building and stuff to see where all of this stuff went down. And I remember a very sobering experience was, all of a sudden I looked down, I was walking with one of my bros. I go, "Hey man, look down." And there's bloody footprints on the ground. You go, "Man, that's American blood on foreign soil." So it got very real, right? Then after that, so in that time frame in 96, there wasn't a whole lot going on in the air. I mean, we'd fly, go out there, loiter for hours, and come back and land. So there wasn't a real, definitely nothing for me kinetic was going on at all.
And yeah, obviously I think we're trying to build up to like 9/11 and everything after that. But I do have one more question about the boring times. What do y'all talk about when you're up there? Just going back and forth. Like, to me, that sounds just horrible. So like, I hope those guys were good conversationalists.
It depended. Yeah. Some of the dudes were, you always wanted to, we usually had paired wingmen, right? So you usually flew with the same guy, and I was paired up with a really good dude. So we're always cutting jokes back and forth and stuff like that. But you mentioned comms. So, after you've been there about 3 months, you start getting a little crusty, right? You've got everything figured out, and I'm flying back, and I can remember, one of the Saudi controllers, air controllers, is just kind of giving me the business on the radio, right? And I just had enough, and I just couldn't help it. And, words after words come out of my mouth back and forth. And I land, and my flight commander walks up to me, he goes, "Hey, bro." He goes, "Congrats, great sortie," and stuff like that. "The operations group commander would like to see you." I go,
"That's never a good thing. That's never a congratulatory thing."
Now he wouldn't.
Trust me, I've talked to my group commander before.
Yeah, well, it just so happened to be that as I'm, giving up foreign relations at this time, the ops group commander is airborne and on the same frequency.
Oh,
you hate to see it. Yeah,
naturally.
Yeah, so that was a full up, stand at attention and just, "Yes, sir. Yes, sir. No, sir. I'll never do." No, 100% right, sir. Yep. And then
I've been chewed out before.
I've been chewed out before. I know that one.
It's
Yeah.
not fun because you're thinking the worst, right? Oh my God, he's going to send me home. He's all these other things. But anyways, he ended up being pretty cool afterwards, but he was just like, don't do that again. I said, yes, sir.
I'm sure he had similar experiences back in his day, so it is what it is.
100%.
So were you still in Japan when 9/11 kicked off and things got real crazy?
No. So I leave Japan in 1997 and I go to Luke Air Force Base and I'm an instructor for about 2 years. At that, and so about nine, so excuse me, at Luke Air Force Base, 97 to 99, I leave active duty Air Force and join the Oklahoma Air National Guard at their F-16 base here in Tulsa. And that's where I was during 9/11. In fact, when 9/11 happened, I looked at my DD-214s the other day. I was in Kuwait, Operation Southern Watch, and got back home on September 9th of 2001.
Oh, wow.
Dang.
Yeah. Crazy, right?
Man, yeah. So watching that's a sobering thing. And you've been training your entire time for war. What was the feeling around the squadron and amongst your group of friends when that happened? Did you guys know that you were going? I imagine it was exactly like Starship Troopers, where you're all running down the flight line and you scream "War! We're going to war!" and all of that, because that's how it was, for everybody except for Trent and I. I was younger. It was a 50-cent draft dollar shot night at the local bar the night before. On September 10th, I was not in the military yet. I was a 21-year-old gentleman in Northeast Ohio. But what was the general feeling around a group of people that have trained their entire life just specifically for something like this?
Well, of course you want to get in the fight, right? I mean, we knew something had to go down. I mean, obviously, all the stuff that was happening, that day. And then a couple of weeks after was a lot of intel gathering, what's going on, how this happened and that type of stuff. But I can remember, thinking, okay, what else is going to happen in the U.S., right? And I remember we got 2 F-16s out on the ramp, got them fully loaded, and we didn't have an alert facility, but we were sitting alert, and not knowing what was going to go down and stuff. And I remember me and my good buddy Francis, spending a couple of nights there in the squadron building, just finding floor space to crash out on and stuff like that. And it was a dawn of a new era that obviously launched us into several decades of a global war on terror that I don't think any of us could have imagined.
Yeah. And the impact on the families can't be understated either. That had to be a trying time for your wife. And, did you have children at this time? So that was a while after the pilot training.
Yeah. So at this time I've got 2 kiddos. And no, I've got 3. We've got 3, all 3 of our kids at this time and stuff. Yeah. So that's a new dynamic, right? I remember having my wife, Carrie, I said, hey, why don't you go get the kids out of school and stuff like that? You want them at home and kind of, so they can be with their mom and everything. But it was weird. That was a weird time frame.
It was, because again, it's not only yourself. I went to Indoc and I was a single dude, had no tie downs, essentially to say. But when I went back, because I terribly failed the first time, when I went back the second time, I ended up having children, and that was a whole thing. It was like, my son was born in the pipeline, so I had 2 kids at that time, and it was completely different. The feeling I remember was remarkably different, because it wasn't just about yourself. If it's just us, as grown men, we're like, get me in the fight, let's go, I don't care. But there's always that nagging part in the back of your head. And then the logistical strain that follows is when the nuts and bolts of actually making sure that they're going to be okay when you're gone. Like, you don't know that you're going to be leaving. We all assume we were just going to leave right away. It was just like, okay, yep, we're out the door. And you have to figure out a way to make sure that everybody's taken care of back home. How soon was it from 9/11 to when you actually deployed in support of what we now know as the global war on terror?
Yeah, it was early the next year. So I deployed to Turkey in 2002 and stuff, and we were fighting the war in Iraq we're still, so 9/11, but obviously the war was in Afghanistan initially, right? And then transition to, I think the full assault into Iraq happened in 2003 timeframe. So, but still Operation Northern Watch, Southern Watch was going on at that time. So there was definitely heightened tensions and all that stuff. Yeah. And you're 100% right, Aaron. I mean, once you have family and stuff like that, but, there's always this nagging thing, when you're on, when you're the pointy end of the spear and stuff, just like you guys are, that, you got to go, right? And,
Yep.
having wife, kids, stuff like that, it's not an excuse to stay home. There's plenty of guys I know deployed and, their wives were back, had babies while they were gone and that type of stuff. It's what we signed up for. You just go, right? And go and make it happen. But, after, for me, after the second deployment, the third deployment, the fourth, fifth, sixth, and then the seventh deployment, you kind of do start asking yourself a couple of questions like, what do I love the most here? And where do my priorities lie and stuff like that? Because I did not have it in me to not go. I mean, it would have been more devastating for me to stay back. But I will say this, I have the most awesome wife on the face of the planet. I never asked her if any of this stuff was okay. It just always was. Never complained, never questioned anything. No, boo-hooing, please stay home or any of that stuff. And so it made it much easier for me to go.
Right. And behind every strong meat eater is their actual strength, which is the wife, the lioness, keeping things in line at home and keeping you on track and on target as well. So much shout out to Carrie for giving you that support. So, as you go through those deployments, and we don't tell a whole lot of war stories here, but, as you go through those deployments and you moved into a leadership position, you're no longer just in charge of a 2-ship or a 4-ship. You're no longer just an instructor pilot or an evaluator. Now you're no kidding. I assume, squadron commander came soon after that, and then deployed group commander, I'm sure, came after that. As you had those deployments, how did your feeling about those deployment changes? You got to those upper echelons of leadership, because a lot of times, just like your family priorities and the deployment priority shift, how did your priorities as a leader shift now that you had all these, you can look back and you can see 20 years ago, Colonel Nick Nichols, you see Lieutenant Nichols, right. When you look at these young men that you're leading into war, how did that change your perception of those deployments?
Yeah, and I'm a pretty simple guy. So I always go back to blocking and tackling, right? Like the first statement I made, don't ever let anybody outwork you. So number one, it starts with setting the example as the old guy, right? And doing all the things right and being disciplined in everything that goes with combat aviation. And I think that became not necessarily a burden, but it became like a really high intense priority. Right. Because if you're not setting the standard, if you're not holding people accountable, and you guys know as well as I do, I mean, throughout the years of, the global war on terrorism, the ROE would change, and a lot of the stuff was driven by politics and everything else, and not, trying to get into that aspect of it. But it could be difficult at times, right? There was things that you really wanted to do in the air, but you could not. And it was tough kind of, trying to corral, fighter pilots is like herding cats and stuff like that. You get it, you get the passion and everything else behind it. And you go, you know what? There's still rules in war. And we gotta do the right thing. We're Americans. We fight the right way and stuff. And that was tough on occasion. But I think the biggest thing was just, maintaining those core disciplines, don't forget how to fly your airplane. Don't get caught up in the moment and those type of things. And, basically, if you can't do anything else, just, control your 3-foot world around you, because that's all you had. You got this tiny cockpit, just focus on that.
Well, yeah. In a world of leadership, and you're leading leaders, right? Like that's what you're doing. And highly individualistic people, like pilots are definitely not known for being, pushovers and maybe, like they're not just going to do what you say just because you say it. So I think there's a correlation between our community and yours, is that, being a highly competent person is, the what you use to lead people, right? And then having that style and all that other stuff after that. Like, what was your leadership style, and did you ever have to dress down a young lieutenant that went off on the ATC tower after that and have like a weird moment where you're like, I'm that guy now? This is
I'm a them, not an us anymore.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, our communities are very similar too, because it's funny, because when you're whether you're given a mission commander brief or whatever you're doing, standing up in front of a group of fighter pilots, they don't just think they're smarter than you. They know that they're smarter than you, right? And that's kind of the baseline. As long as you understand that going in, as far as like, man, my unit here in Tulsa, I was very fortunate. I flew with a bunch of really good, disciplined combat aviators, right? So most of the stuff that we had to deal with wasn't flying related. It was board shenanigan stuff that would happen in theater, right? And go, wow, this was a good idea. So, I remember one time, a bunch of the fellas, we had like if you're a C-130 person out there, I love you, but they were trying to play a joke on the C-130 squadron, right? And we always had this thing when we were in theater, we called it Operation Doughboy, right? And at the step desk, you'd always put donuts up there and stuff like that just to monitor and see who was going to come and grab this. We said, hey, let's do operate. Yeah, you'd always have the one guy who would get fat on deployment and wouldn't lose weight, right? So what we did is we tried to do the same thing, or not me, the idiots tried to do the same thing by dropping stuff off on the doorstep of the C-130s, right? Well, guess what you don't do in a combat theater? Drop an unmarked box. Oh, yeah. Yeah. So this created a little bit of situation and stuff that involved the wing commander, security
and forces, EOD and security force
and stuff. And so it was more of a situation of, grabbing the lieutenant by his ear afterwards and let's go, okay, that was funny, but stupid.
But
okay, so and why you should never do that again. Operation Doughboy. Oh, good old days.
I'm here for it. I may or may not. My controller and I will leave the specific time frame out of it so that nobody can figure out who I'm talking about here. But we made one of our officers think that he was fat by bringing him desserts like kind of every day, and then telling him he didn't need to go on runs, and then surreptitiously over the course of a month, we just like tightened his gear up a little bit so that one time we got an alert call and he puts it on. And even as we're stepping out to this real world call in a country where we were conducting combat operations, he puts it on. He's like, oh my God, I think I'm getting fat. And just from across the room, the controller looked at me and I looked at him and we're like, it's working. We were conducting psychological warfare because that's the shenanigans that happen when you have to do these things.
I'm assuming there were some other things that happened though. Sorry. Aaron, you still there?
Yes.
We lost you for a second. So I apologize for me talking over Aaron at the end there. And no two deployments are the same, right? And that causes stress. But like, what was happening? I'm assuming there was something that happened on those deployments that led you to the folds of honor. What you're doing now?
Oh yeah, I mean, and my job, obviously, as a fighter pilot, my view of the war was way different than your guys. My role always was, my job was to make sure that 18-year-old kid on the ground with a rifle came home. That was it, right? And then not every mission went the way you wanted it to, right? And, you roll up on get called to a tick only to get there about, 30 seconds late and, RPGs, gunfire, rolling up and, seeing a couple of Humvees that hit IEDs or flipped upside down, trying to get helos in during gunfire to get guys rescued and stuff like that. So yeah, it's the aftermath of war, right? It's the the folks who are getting ready to get knocks on the door, and the folks who pay the ultimate sacrifice. And yeah, that's definitely a precursor to me wanting to join the folds of honor, because at the end of the day, you're like, hey, what's going to happen to these families afterwards? Yep. And we've lost thousands in the global war on terrorism, and bloody, brutal fight, especially you guys in the special operations community and stuff. And yeah, and so my big thing is now still being upright and not buried 6 feet under. I feel like I've got a moral responsibility to, one, never take for granted that I woke up today and saw my wife, and number two, to make sure that I take care of these families and whatever I can do to influence that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you keep saying it's not the same as us, but I got to tell you, it feels like you have a relationship with those people in the sky when you're on the ground, and they come in at just the right time out of nowhere and save the day. And it's, like you always want to meet those people. And we've talked to A-10 pilots, AC-130 pilots, and all those other people that have been on the podcast. And it's like, you always want to meet the people that were there. And it's sometimes hard to track them down, especially if you're not the JTAC on the scene. Yep. So I kind of want to know, did you make any of those relationships with some of those ground pounders and some of those people that you helped support on the ground through all those times?
Yeah. So there was opportunity where we had, how it is in theater. You're super busy. If you weren't flying, eating, sleeping or working out, I mean, that was it. That was your entire schedule. So there wasn't a whole lot of, and plus we were divided up into different compounds. So a lot of the relationships or phone relationships, obviously, maybe calling the JTAC, if they could get to a landline or something like that before you went out, just to cover, any questions that you might have. Then some of the stuff that we did with the, especially with the SOCOM guys and stuff, we would have opportunity to actually go over to their compound and brief and talk about stuff. And so, so you would develop those relationships there.
Yeah, absolutely. So talking a little bit more about folds of honor. So 2007, Lieutenant Colonel Dan Rooney, out of Oklahoma, the Air National Guard there, he was, lucky enough to be on a flight where some remains were transported, and it affected him in such a way that he wanted to start Folds of Honor. So tell us a little bit about the mission of Folds of Honor, just what it does, and, everything from the scholarships to, how many chapters you guys have to that whole thing.
You bet. So Folds of Honor, we exist for one purpose. We provide educational scholarships to the spouses and kids of military members and now first responders who have either been killed or disabled. Since inception, we provided 44,000 scholarships. That's about $220 million out the door. So we've got kiddos in, every state across the U.S., representing every branch of the military. And a huge honor to do so. You mentioned chapters, so we have, obviously I work for corporate. I'm the president here at the Folds, but we have really cool localized effort in 32 different areas, in mostly big major metropolitan areas like Dallas, Houston, Chicago, St. Louis, those type of areas, raising funds on a local basis. But the neatest thing that we do, that I've been able to do with this is, our recipients are obviously super thankful for the educational scholarships. I mean, we're not providing a full ride. We're not, any of that stuff. Our scholarships are $5,000 a year. But the cool thing about it for these families, it creates this really cool extended family, right? And they understood that they're still seen, they're still heard. Their loved ones' memory and their service and sacrifice can kind of live in perpetuity through these kids, because our mission is to honor their sacrifice, educate their legacy. And that's exactly what we do. And it's been an honor to do so for the 5 years that I've been here. And, kudos to Dan Rooney, who started this thing above his garage with really no rich friends and no influence or anything else, and has turned this, turned out $220 million.
Yeah. Cool. And by far the community aspect is the most important. So connecting those people nationwide, like $5,000 is a great gift. It's not going to solve all your problems, but I'll tell you what can, is having a big tribe of people that understand what you're going through, and having that connection, and having a community that gives you a sense of purpose, and having something to engage in. You guys do this through your golf initiatives as well. And you guys have golf marathons and golf outings, and obviously you're very hoity-toity fighter pilots. So you all love to golf, obviously. That's why every single Air Force base in the world has multiple golf courses on it. But how did that come about, and how big has that gotten? Because it started off extremely small and now it's huge.
Oh yeah. So our CEO, Dan Rooney, is also a PGA professional. So he played Division I golf. So that's where he turned to initially, and started an initiative with the PGA of America called Patriot Golf Days, which still exists today and actually will be going on this weekend. So you can go to patriotgolfdays.com and check it out if you want to fundraise in the game of golf. And it has just blossomed into millions of dollars for the organization. And whether it's somebody, playing 100 holes of golf in a golf marathon, somebody wants to host a golf event, or just simply volunteering at one of our golf events or something like that. It's been kind of the lifeblood. Well, it has been the lifeblood of the organization for a long time.
Yeah.
And yes, I am an officer. I suck at golf. Okay. I'm more, I told you I went to school in South Georgia, so I'm more of a redneck. So I actually have a ranch. I love deer hunting. And so that's my version of golf, but I will go golf.
You ruined it. I was going to ask you if Valdosta State has a lot of golf scholarships out there, Southern Georgia.
No, I don't think they do. I don't think we had a golf course.
I always love the motto of Valdosta. Like Valdosta's motto, or their actual city, is "It's close to where you want to be." because you don't want to be in Valdosta, but it's a drive away from other stuff. I want to hit some important dates for you, sir. We've got July 15th, your scholarship award offer. Notifications are emailed, so people should be on the lookout for that. And then July 20th, the acceptance, along with August 31st, the check-in deadline is coming up. What other dates do you have that are weighing on your mind that are upcoming that you want folks to be aware of?
Yeah. So if you're listening out there and you're a veteran with a disability rating or first responder with a catastrophic injury, you've lost a loved one, keep this date in mind, February 1st, 2024. That's when our next scholarship application window opens, and it's open for 2 months. So that is super important. And the other thing that's important to us too, when we're we're really hitting the heart of fundraising season right now, is December 31st. Okay. That's the end of the fundraising year for us. So if you want to get in the fight with us, go to foldsofhonor.org, click on the donate tab, or click on the squadron tab. It'll take you to the same place. And you're asking, why the squadron tab? Squadron is our affinity group. Okay. $13 a month. Okay. To join our squadron. That's less than what you spent at Starbucks this morning. And a lot of people go, well, why the number 13? Well, it takes 13 folds to bring that flag to that iconic triangle shape of freedom, right? That every service member's family who has ever buried their loved one knows exactly what that means. And the weight of that flag is huge. And the least we can do is get in a fight for $13 a month and be part of something that I think is bigger than all of us.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And kudos to y'all for that this is like a subject matter that's difficult to talk about for a lot of people. And just to live in that space, I don't know if I could do it, but we're always supremely grateful for those folks of you like you that can go out there and create this positivity and get after that subject matter head on. You know what I mean? Because that's what it takes to create that community and to make a difference. And do you have any stories about things that have happened with Folds of Honor that you can share with us, like things that you've seen that have changed people's lives, and just a quick anecdote about what it looks like in person when you're able to affect someone in a positive way?
Absolutely. So I remember this was probably 2 years ago. I was at Atlanta Motor Speedway, and we were invited out to, come out and, do a tour and kind of get a behind the scenes and stuff. And we had 3 different families, and they were within driving distance of the Atlanta area and stuff like that. But and this is why I love military families so much, just almost uncomfortably thankful for everything that we were doing. I mean, and when you hear a kid make a statement like, I'm a first generation college student, I wouldn't be able to go to college if it weren't for the Folds of Honor, and sit there and just, hugging a kid who had lost their dad and stuff like that. That's when it gets super real. Right. And yeah, I mean, I get teared up talking about it, and you're exactly right, Trent. Sometimes it is difficult, but man, it is so necessary. Right. It would be maybe the easy thing for people sometimes is just to go, you know what, if I don't talk to them or acknowledge it or anything else, then maybe it isn't real, but it's very, very real. And the cost of freedom is very high. And a lot of people pay a dear price, for the freedoms that we enjoy every day.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like, doing your duty, right? You just have to get after it, and it's not always easy, but man, I think it's incredible what y'all are doing. And before we wrap this up, obviously I can't stay in a serious zone for too much longer. Your call sign is Nick, and you promised that if I asked you directly, you would tell me the story. So
yeah, so I will tell you up front, it's not a funny story. Okay,
even better.
So, and I'm glad you asked me this. I was actually going to throw it in there at the last minute if you didn't. But so my call sign Nick. So my background story is this. So I told you that my dad was a fighter pilot, right? 2 tours in Vietnam, Silver Star, Purple Heart, war hero, and all that stuff. Unfortunately, when I was 15 years old, I was one of those kids that got the knock on the door, and my dad had been killed in a tragic accident. So that obviously, thrust me, my mom, my brother and sister into a whole new dynamic that nobody was counting on. And, and part of my passion for the Folds is I was one of those kids looking at college going, how am I going to do this? And, I worked 40 hours a week, on a loading dock at night to put myself through school and stuff, and never wanted, anyways, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself a little bit, but where does Nick come from? Nick was my dad's call sign. So it's a legacy.
Yeah, you're right. That's not funny at all.
Yeah, that's the heaviest thing. Yeah, I think you could.
It's heavy, but man, what if you look back on it now, tragedy to triumph, right? To be able to kind of like pick up the baton from him and keep going was really cool. So there's
absolutely
story, right? And stuff like that. And again, like I mentioned before, having to be that kid that had to work 40 hours a week and put himself through school. Kids can't do that now. There's no way. I just got finished, getting my last kid out of college and stuff. And I'm way too familiar with how expensive college is. That's not possible for a kid to do now. Right. And so, I don't want any military or first responder kid to look at their educational dreams as something that's unattainable because of money. We can make this happen.
Yeah. Well, sir, that's absolutely righteous. There's something that we do as a standard here on the podcast is we always ask our guests, and for you being a 30-year F-16 guy with the history that you have and the continued service that you provided the nation, I'm sure this is going to be easy one for you. But we always ask our guests, if you had one piece of advice to give some folks that are coming up, like obviously they're not going to be able to work 40 hours a week and put themselves through school. So just saying, hey, work hard and pull up your bootstraps. It's just not going to work anymore, right? What advice would you have to the listeners out there that are going to try to do something impossible, whether it's become a PJ or become an F-16 pilot, or, just try something as monumental as getting themselves through school on their own dime today? What advice would you give to those young people that are at the beginning of their journey, like you were back in the day?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question because I was thinking about this the other day. So, my son, who's a college graduate now and stuff, and he got recruited to go play college lacrosse, right? And so in high school and everything, here in Oklahoma, he's the badass. He was a face-off guy, beating everybody and all this other stuff. And remember, he shows up at school. He goes to a school in northern Indiana, and I remember he calls me after about his first week of fall training, right? So 12 hours away. College classes and high school classes are a little bit harder. And guess what? Everybody in college lacrosse is really, really good. Mm-hmm. And I could tell by the tone of his voice, he was intimidated. Okay. And kind of asking me for permission to quit. And I go, I hear you. I go, how about this? I'll make a deal with you. Don't quit for one more day. Just don't quit today. And we'll talk tomorrow. And that is the advice I would give everybody. If you're going to go do something hard, man, hard stuff is hard. But if you can operate in a 3-foot world and just tell yourself, you know what, I'm not going to quit today, and have that conversation with yourself again tomorrow and just keep going. And for him, one day turned into a week, turned into a month, turned into a 4-year college career, right? He never gave up. And stuff. And I think we all have to have those conversations with us, whatever in life you're struggling with. If you're like me, you get to pilot training, you're intimidated as hell, because you feel like everybody there is smarter and better than you. Guess what? They're not. They're all scared too. Okay. They are. Everybody shows up. Everybody's self-conscious, even though, they may be walking around with their chest poked out and just think, they're the best thing since sliced bread. But if you can formulate in your mind, always control the 3 foot of space around you, okay, and just don't quit today, and then have the same conversation again tomorrow. That's what got me through.
Well said, sir. Colonel Nick Nichols, 30 years in the Air Force, serving now to this day with Folds of Honor. So go check out foldsofhonor.org. Go over to the donate tab. You're not going to even notice $13 on an auto pay, but that's going to give somebody the support that you could not possibly have done on your own. So us as a community, sir, I'm going to hit this button directly afterwards. You got me. I'm in. You sold me. I'll become donating today, and so will the rest of the Ones Ready team. We just want to say thanks for coming on, sir. We really appreciate your insight, your wisdom, your experience, and everything you're doing now through Folds of Honor. So everybody listening out there, go check out foldsofhonor.org. Follow this awesome project. Make sure that you're keeping track of the dates. February 24th is the big date that we want to put out there for everybody. Is that correct, sir?
February 1st. February 1st. Yep.
Okay, February 1st, 2024. That's the date to mark on your calendar. Set yourself a reminder right now. We'll put everything in the description. We'll make sure to get your schedule out there, and you'll be seeing a lot more Folds of Honor on the Ones Ready page from now on. So, sir, Trent, thanks for else out there, train hard. We'll see you next time.
Awesome. Thanks, fellas.